we're serving under President Clinton, it was because I had been running a nonprofit organization focused on youth and family economic development, and began to realize no matter what I did, we were having marginal improvement, not systemic improvement. And I'm embarrassed to say, but as a finance major, I took minimal other classes, and so did not understand the impact of policy. And when I realized that I had done everything I could from a programmatic level, but there were really systemic barriers, I decided to go into public service. And so I had the privilege to serve under Clinton in Treasury, because I had raised money to actually start a bank. And I said, I don't want to do this. I want to have eyes wide open and actually understand what does it take to run a bank. And after my tour of duty, I decided not to start a bank because I found that the regulatory environment that I would be operating in would not allow me to do what I wanted to do in terms of helping new majority folks and helping the communities that look like me and the communities that I care about. In the case of Obama, what drew me is my mom said, I running another company, and I got a call from a friend that says, hey, we would love for you to serve. And I laughed out loud. And I said, yeah, I don't think so, dude. And so he gave me the role, and I was like, all right, maybe. What was appealing to me is because I was actually commuting back and forth to California. I would leave Monday morning at 7 a.m. and come home on a red eye Friday night. And it was a toll on the family because we had 2 babies. And so I said, okay, I'll take a look at it. My wife was like, take a look at it. And then I told my mom said, you need to go work for this Black man because there may never be another Black president. And so I interviewed one time and they were like, do you want the job? And I was like, sure. So it took me off the road. I made my mom happy. She got to meet him. And I actually had a good time. I had a really good experience. I went in eyes wide open, did a tour of duty. So was in education, was in the White House, worked on the My Brother's Keeper, and really took that job to have fun. Because I knew it was going to be the last time I did service. And so I was able to have fun. First time was very practical. The second time was just really enjoy the ride of having the privilege to work with the first Black president.
So just being more present in a different type of way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, you sit in Treasury, like you take notes, but it's like, what'd you say? I need to move on and actually do my work. I enjoyed going to meetings. I actually paid attention. I didn't multitask. I listened. I thought about, how is he maneuvering the world and connecting the dots between the agencies, and how, when clearly for certain agencies, you can't really legally help the Black community, what was he really trying to do to help the Black community? And I would say gave me a much broader perspective on policy, both at a federal level, but also at an agency level. Obviously, once healthcare passed, there was no other legislation that passed under Obama ever, because the Senate shifted. But the amount of policy changes we made with inside agencies, I don't think anybody even is going to touch that, because they don't even know how we embedded the changes we wanted inside institutions. That was probably the best lesson I've ever learned.
That's amazing. What's something that you learned, during your service in politics about the government's impact on, our economy, particularly on the startup economy, that you think people would be shocked to find out about?
I think there's 3 things. One I learned while there, I guess one I learned before there, one there while there, and one after. I think, one that I was aware of is that not the majority, a significant amount of our large tech companies in Silicon Valley were all funded by the government. They all received SBIR or STTR.
Solar City.
So, exactly.
I think we should talk about that, like explain that a little more in detail, because for some people who will watch this, they'll be like, what? What does that mean?
Yeah. All the new ones for sure. But, we think about Oracle and Apple, all of those, that's how they got started. And they either received an SBIR, which is a Small Business Innovation Research Grant, or they got the STTR, which is another grant that comes at, and so I'll keep it high level. So, and then the STTR was a Small Business Technology Transfer. So they are federal dollars that are designed to help companies grow and scale. And they come in many forms, but for all intents and purposes, it's free or low cost of capital money. It is not delivered at the federal level, it's delivered through states. And so you have to understand how to maneuver state government. It is a competitive application process that does not reside within the office. It's actually out. All federal grants and competitions are always reviewed by a publicly established review board. And it takes time. We've had a couple of entrepreneurs in our portfolio. It took them almost a year to get the grant. And so I think a lot of people don't know about about it because most people are like, I'm a business owner. I'm going to stay in my lane. I'm going to ignore government. And then let's be honest, anytime you apply for something from the government, including your taxes, which should have been filed by now, it's a pain in the neck. Let's just be honest. It's just a bunch of paperwork and a bunch of words, and the instructions are bigger than the one page, and it's just overwhelming. And so I think people write it off. But you're talking about grants as little as $150,000 all the way up to several million dollars. And there's phases to them. So you can be starting, let's just say, an educational app. You can get $150,000, $200,000 to get it started. You meet your milestones, you can go back and get 502 million. You get it done, and you go up to a phase 3 and get over $1 million. And so it is the way, to Erica's point, that Tesla and all these others have been able to get their business started without using any of their own money. And obviously, again, because it's a non-dilutive perspective, because the government, can't take an equity stake, it also strategically allows the founder to hold a majority share of their company before they have to go to the capital markets during those times when many entrepreneurs we know are giving away 30% just to get their first investment. So it's a huge opportunity.
This is such a necessary conversation that even though Eric and I are VC investors, we have made it a point to teach founders that VC is just one form, and that you should absolutely understand all of your options, and you should always start with the free money, right? Like, yes, it's a little more painful of a process. Yes, it takes a little bit longer. However, it's worth getting grant money if you can. And that should always be an additional avenue that you start with outside of just looking for investment. So thank you for giving some deeper insight on that.
Yeah, no problem. It's a great program. Like I said, but you got to build, as an entrepreneur, you got to build time into it, right? Nothing free is free. So while the money is free, it's probably several hours of an application process. So I'll say that's what I knew going in. When I got there, the biggest eye-opening was to understand the impact one could make at an institutional level and not just at a federal level. And that translated to me of being thoughtful at the onset of a business or a fund. What are the policies and procedures I want to put into place before other people can start mucking around in it? Because some of the things we were able to kind of embed in the start of new programs within can't be changed. Prime example in the Department of Education, where I spent some time with Arnie and Jim. You could be arrested as a young person, and if you do not return to school, they pack up your files, they put them in a box that goes into a storage bin that never is to be found again. And so if for some reason you were there by mistake, or you were there short term, or you were there for a long term, and you came back, there was no way for you to restart your career in academia because there would be no records. And so we then were able to put in policy in the Department of Education that if a student is indeed incarcerated or sent off to some different facility, it is by law, they have to maintain those records and provide academic education. And so it no longer disrupts that pathway. That was huge because, first of all, I just assumed that it happened before, but it didn't. And now we're not relying on the Senate or the Congress and their political small p ways of who that benefits or doesn't. It is permanent policy. And so I think being thoughtful as a founder, what are the policies you need to put in place before you go to investors so that they are permanent and they're non-negotiable when you're floating a term sheet? And for funds, same thing. What are the things you want to put in place before the LPs start mucking around and you begin to make too many concessions and really spending time with that? And then I'd say the lesson that I've learned since then that you alluded to, Erica, is that as much as I'm any given day, I'm filling out a form, I despise government, usually when I'm standing in the DMV, particularly, they are so integral to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The policies that are put in place, the dollars that are allocated at federal level, if anybody's in a region right now where SBCI money is coming down, that is darn near low cost of capital money coming to states, coming to localities that entrepreneurs should think about how do they access depending on the funds they get put into. I really began to appreciate post-service that government can indeed be a catalyst for entrepreneurial activity.
So this would be a great segue to Selena. Hi, Selena. She has a question. She said, are there any entities that help with submitting for those particular type of grants?
Each state, and I hesitate when I say state because I'm in DC, we actually do have, we had SSBCR, SSBI, we had SBR and STTR money, but nobody took advantage of it, so it got clawed back. wherever the dollars sit within your local entity, whether it's at a state level or a city or county level, there usually should be someone there who can actually help you walk through the process. There is so much money available that there are people who actually sometimes will do the application for you, because as we found out in DC, if you don't use the money, it gets clawed back. And let's be honest, there's no mayor or governor that wants to have to send money back to the government.
Yeah,
So
they don't want to lose budget, right?
Exactly. So ideally, there's someone in the office who can help you, and or you can say to them what other local people have successfully received money. And we have found that many entrepreneurs are willing to hop on a 30-minute phone call and say, here's what I did. But sometimes the local areas will put sample applications on. And then the federal government does have, I think they're probably outdated, but videos and tutorials that you can follow, the prior webinars that they've done, that you can see how it fills out. I would say it's probably, out of 100% effort, I would say 25% of it is knowing what it is you're trying to accomplish, and 75% of it is just checking the right boxes around legality and structure, et cetera.
Are there certain types of businesses that are, appropriate for SBIR or SBIC? Like, how do you know if you might fit into one of those categories?
Yeah, so the SBIR and the STTR for tech companies, there has to be some tech component. It could be tech enabled, but it has to have a tech component because it's very much focused on scale and getting you.
And sorry, you said it was SBIR, and what was the other one?
Or STTR, the technology transfer.
Okay.
Yeah. So both of those have to be tech related somewhere in that process. For the SSBCI, which is money that comes from Treasury.
By the way, government people love acronyms, so we're about this. And Melissa is really very, very fluent in them, living in DC.
I'm putting them in.
I appreciate you dropping those in there, because that was going to be my next thing. Like, can you just drop that in? Because I'm confused with all the letters right now.
So the SBIR and the STTR are grants. I'm sorry, are dollars grants to businesses that are tech or tech enabled. The SSBCI is the State Small Business Credit Initiative, and I'm happy to say DC finally got it. And those are dollars giving to whatever designated agency, whether it's the insurance agency or the banking agency of state. And those dollars then are deployed by the state government to intermediaries. So Rain Ventures could get an SSBCI, and those are dollars that are used for investment. They're used for loan collateral programs. They're used for guarantee programs. They're any way you want to use them to be able to accelerate business development in your region. So we're in DC. Agencies in DC, we could apply to DC. You all could possibly apply to Miami and New York City. So that vehicle is more of a leverage point for existing investors to be able to expand their portfolio. And what's interesting, people say, well, I don't know if I'm big enough to apply. Just rest assured, JP Morgan has SSBCI money. So it is for all sizes. And it's something that people are doing at a higher institutional volume than we imagine, because they want the credit and the backstop for all these investments.
Donald Robinson said JP Morgan. Wow. Yeah. I think that, especially in the culture of Black and Brown founders, there's this thing where, you have to figure it out yourself. You have to fund it yourself. You have to, you can't show any weaknesses. And the reality is that, and you look at the history of corporate America and these big companies that founders are trying to mimic and be like, they've all received support and continue to receive it, right? It's not something that stopped once they became big. They still have arms that still rely on public money.
Yep. And that's the crazy part, right? I think when you and I have had this conversation, I think when people say, well, why can't women or businesses of color, compete? Well, it's because we don't have access to the non-dilutive free money that everybody else has had access to. And, let's be honest, that the SSBCI, I dropped the link, so that's a $10 billion program per state, potentially. That's no chump change. I mean, I don't know how much Tesla got, but I think Oracle was rumored to have got in the early days, and obviously worth more now, somewhere between $6 to $12 million. That's
the difference of your trajectory, right? Like, that's literally the difference.
Absolutely.
And it's not a debt, and it's no LPs telling you what to do, right?
It's in paper you have to fill out, but I mean, it also explains why Larry Ellison is so wealthy, right? I mean, again, you and I have had this conversation, but when I look to entrepreneurs, irrespective of race or gender, the trajectory of VC right now is that most of them will not be the majority on their cap table after their second or third round. And so while it's great that we can also talk about wealth creation, you ain't getting that.
Right.
Because you're continue to, and depending on time, you could be less than 5%. I mean, I've seen, we've all seen, particularly Black women, probably through some non-linear thinking of who their investors are nowhere to be seen on the cap table. And so I do think that while we, on the investor side, are very much about making money, we want to make sure that we make money too. And so these types of programs help improve our margins because
absolutely. Well, you get a grant of that you get a nice grant. Well, that allows, if you're a fund, that allows you to employ more talent, which then allows you to help the ecosystem. If you're a founder, it allows you to bring on the talent that you need and not have, some type of liability. Carlos, Carlos says we don't have this critical information. And so Carlos, this is why Eric and I at Rain Ventures and why Melissa at 1863, this is why we're choosing to do venture differently. And so we are trying to get information out here. As we're learning, we're sharing. And as we're realizing what founders don't know, we're prioritizing. So every month we have the Series A list that we do. And not only just that, we try to drop a toolkit down in here, links, etc., for you to not just share and keep to yourself, but to share to others. And so that is why we do this. And that is why we all take our time. And so this is why it's so important that you all drop your questions in, because this allows us to also curate conversations in the future of information that we're seeing not really being answered out here in the traditional VC way.
And so, Melissa, we did a panel, I think 2 weeks ago with the SEC Small Business Forum, and they're actually actively working on policy recommendations as to, how can they help get more equitable access to capital and more capital into the hands of funds like ours and founders of color. I mean, I'm sure you've thought through this really well, knowing the ins and outs of the political system. What would you recommend?
To the federal government?
Yeah, to the SEC.
Ooh.
To the Congress and the policymakers. And what would be your dream policy that you think would have the most impact?
So I'd say there's three things that I would recommend in the vein of helping entrepreneurs. One is that we begin to think about providing more backstops and guarantees to the earlier stage institutions, whether they're CDFIs, banks, or VCs. Yeah. We are taking on the greatest risk. That risk translates to the perception of our funds in the eyes of LPs who have no clue about the small business sector. And so I think if we're willing to give JP Morgan a guarantee for their impact fund, you got to give a guarantee to us. And so I think that's helpful. I know the SBA is thinking about that. I think the second thing is do not ever do direct lending. If you've ever heard the SBA administrator or the SBA is thinking about doing direct lending, please don't, because they don't know what they're doing. The government should stay in its lane and really be an enabler and not a driver. And then the other thing I would say as it relates to the SEC is to think about and really revisit some of the rules and regulations around reporting and asset requirements, et cetera, and the whole registered advisor role. What I find is that we had over 300, I think it was $300 billion of dollars in new Black GPs post George Floyd. But the reality of the cost that we incurred because of race, because of gender, because of the types of business we're going after is absolutely ludicrous. And so that's where I think the SEC, since we all have to be registered, or ideally we're registered, that they think about some different check boxes and different hurdles. I don't think we're any less qualified, but there are certainly some that are cut out because they're a first-time fund manager or something like that, and it doesn't make them a bad person.
Yeah. I love those ideas, particularly the backstop idea. Yeah. I'm going to integrate that into my recommendation. So, this has been really helpful to learn a little bit more about what's going on in the government, but you obviously have done a lot more in your career. I'd love to sort of segue into your role at Georgetown University as a professor, and what impact you feel like you're making through teaching these courses and supporting the community there.
It's not because I'm trying to get wealthy, that's for sure. So I teach 4 courses to MBA students primarily, and then I have some Master of Foreign School of Foreign Service students and some Master Policy students. And every now and then I get a law student. So I do it because I'm able to have, they're all electives, engaging, honest conversations around capitalism, around racism, around structural barriers. We talk about privilege.
We didn't have any classes like that when I did my MBA. So I find it fascinating.
And that's what a lot of people say. They're like, well, how'd you get away with this? And I was like, well, one, I only teach electives. And so I'm very clear the oversight of an elective versus a required course is different. As you get the right credentials, you get the student evaluations, you can keep teaching as long as you want, which has pros and cons. As when I went back to Georgetown, my finance professor was still there. That was not a good thing. And so I am able to keep the students engaged. We do real life projects in every single class. In our impact investing class, they are creating real funds. I see about 500 students a year. I'm getting students who are in the nonprofit sector trying to convert to the for-profit sector. I'm getting skeptical investment bankers like, what is this social mess you keep talking about? And then a bunch in between. And because I'm treating them like adults, because we're having honest conversations, because I'm bringing guest speakers to tell it like it is. And I'm day one, I'm like, I know exactly how much you're paying to class for being in this class, every single class. I will show up at that level and beyond, but you've got to show up at that level and beyond. And they're like, well, nobody else has offered that to us. And if I'm slacking, I'm like, I think I'm slacking. Am I slacking? I'm an entrepreneur. And during my last mod, my company was potentially going to get acquired. It did not. And I was like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm about to miss 2 classes. So you can rank me low or you can help me through how I can be helpful. And they were like, well, if you could just get us some guest speakers and do this, it was great. And so, they dinged me in their comments of saying like, we wish we had more of you, but it did not impact my course evaluation because I was in dialogue with them. And, when you're spending more money on a degree than you're gonna make it a starting salary, you got to understand why they're showing up, but it's because they actually want to learn something, not because they want to pass a bunch of rote tests. So it's a lot of fun. And there's
I appreciate that about you. And I think that's one of the first things that attracted me, like why I wanted to figure out wherever you would be so I could come sit and talk to you, because you have this way about you that you're super intellectual, super experienced, but you have a way of meeting people where they are. And for me, tackling music to venture, right? And raising a real fund where now I have to understand the verbiage, etc. It was nice to have feedback from you, but support from you too, as a Black woman who's been doing this, right? Something that Eric and I hadn't seen too much of. And so I appreciate that that's the way you approach your educational style too, because you're right. When you can't really make something practical, like, what does it matter?
Right. And then, because I have Eric and I were talking about kids. I mean, I got 6 kids. I didn't pay for 4 college educations so far, and I'm not sure it made them any smarter or brighter. So I'm mindful from a very personal perspective, like this is an investment, people. And Georgetown is okay. I mean, it's a good school. It's not Harvard. And so we don't have a very large endowment. We're like number 726 on the list. So we're, kids are not going for free. Like kids are paying, all kids are paying. And, it's not like, well, if your parents paid a certain amount, you get to go for free. So I'm mindful of that, right? I mean, it's an investment, right? We're talking about, it's an investment somebody was making. I want to make sure, at least in my class that I can control, they're getting an ROI, because I certainly want somebody to do the same for me, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective, because it is an investment. Any way we spend our time is an investment, right? Absolutely. So, that is some of the most expensive currency is the time. And then you add the dollars and it's really expensive. So, and I think that's just a great perspective for founders to even understand, is that, because a lot of times when you're hitting a brick wall with your fundraising to get to an A, or even just a seed round or whatever, or you're just trying to build, you hit these walls, but you don't change what your investment is to make it different. And so I think that even when we think about fundraising, or we think about scaling a company and growing it, is that you do have to analyze, what is your investment into it? Do you need to change the team? Do you need to change the concept? Do you need to change the way you're spending your day? Do you need to change the information you're receiving? There's so many different elements to it, but it all boils down to there is a return on investment that you're going to need for every single aspect of this entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, well, speaking of founders, Melissa, you're also a founder. So we'd love to hear a little bit about your founder journey and, how you think that has also helped you be a better investor.
Yeah, so there's a bookended, excuse me, because I don't know that I'm going to start any more companies after this last one that are venture backed.
Yeah.
But as a bookended, so when I graduated from college, I just had a job, and I'll make it short. I decided that I did not want that job. And I had an opportunity. I knew my division was going to be reorganized. And so I had a chance to get some money out. And I knew then I wanted to start a business. So I told my boss, I want to start this business. I'll do my job, but let me just stay here and work. She's like, great. And so I left and I started a business, and had a business plan, went to the SBA, and a woman there said, we will not invest in you because you're Black, you're female. I don't know any successful women in finance. And I was like, well, ain't that a mess? And I said some other things, but I'll keep it clean. And so when I left that meeting, I said that day, if I ever can help in any way, I will never let this happen to another person, particularly when it looks like me. And so when I had an exit and I became an angel investor, and that really was the trajectory for me of thinking about businesses, whether they're socially oriented or tech oriented or whatever, that I'm mindful that my customer base needs more than just to be a driver of revenue, but I need to drive impact back to them. And so that's been really important to me. And then fast forward 3.5 years ago now, co-founding a company with a white guy and being venture backed. And now we have $13.5 million in us. It was an eye-opening experience in that here I was, it was a joint effort, but it was clear the business was being built based on my experience, traveling to Silicon Valley, sitting in rooms with him, and half of them talking past me. And he's like, no, you gotta talk to Melissa. This is her idea. I'm the tech guy. This is her idea. And then the other half, I would say, pleasantly saying, okay, well, we don't want to talk to the white guy because you're the tech guy. Help me understand, why is it important for us to invest in women and entrepreneurs of color? Because that's what the platform does. And so it was nice, though, to see from, 1991 to 2019, that we had made some progress, right? We had made 50% progress, that people were now at least open to the idea that entrepreneurship can look and be of anyone, as long as you have a viable market. And so I would say as an entrepreneur who's listening, I would say there's probably 3 takeaways. One is that, remember, and I say this with half my investor hat on, but recognizing you are, the investor is never the determinant of your future. Because I easily could have walked out of the SBA and said, well, then screw it. I'm not going to start a business, and I don't know what my life would have been except stuck in a corporate cubicle somewhere like Dilbert. I think the second thing is being mindful that it is so important that when we start to talk about valuation as an early stage business, that you are mindful of your social and intellectual capital somehow being calculated into that valuation. When we raised our first amount of money for Eureka, not only did we do some things offline, so to speak, and test some things, but people understood I was bringing, to your point, Erica, 20 plus years of experience of doing this stuff. Do not discount that. And so we were fortunate enough to start with almost $20 million pre-money valuation, which was almost unheard of. It has pros and cons now, but needless to say, being able to really be assertive about that. And then I think the final thing I would say as an entrepreneur is somebody who I think we as co-founders agree we've taken it probably as far as we can to be really clear about what's your exit strategy, and not the business one, but your personal one. I think we set out to prove that you could make money by helping women and entrepreneurs of color. And you can. It's just slow. And that matches the research that I'm able to do at Georgetown, which says that 50% of all businesses fail within 5 years. Black businesses last at least 8.7 years in length. The challenge, of course, is that longevity does not correlate to increased revenue or access to capital. And so we prove that businesses need our stuff, but we haven't been able to crack the access to capital piece so that we can have a more robust customer base. And so we're cash flow positive. We're not quite profitable, but I think we are now hitting the systemic barriers, coming full circle on policy, and realize I'm not really sure what else we can do, because we can't control the larger ecosystem.
Which is right, like why Rain Ventures in 1863 is so important, right? And not for us to stay at a $50 million, but we have to have the goal of $1 billion under assets with the lens on Black and brown founders and females, or what you proved never changes because you proved it. The problem is that we're still at 3.2% of funding going to Black and brown and female founders. Right. So, unless the venture world magically wants to change those numbers, right, and not just do one checklist, one checkbox, then funds like Rain Ventures, funds like 1863, we're the answer. We are the change. And yes, it's right, going to be a slower change because the funding hasn't been there traditionally.
So right, Melissa, I want to make sure that we give you some time to have the floor to tell folks about the programs at 1863 and how they can get involved, and really just, what inspired you to, take on yet another another project to create impact in the finance world. In addition to 6 kids, she's like Superwoman here.
No, Superwoman.
I'm tired, that's for sure. I think the impetus for 1863 was actually a student project. Every summer, not anymore, but up until we started 1863, I hosted undergraduate and graduate students every summer to do impact projects. And basically call my friends across the country and say, hey, you guys are running a nonprofit, you're running a business, you're trying to do something impactful, let me give you some free labor. And during this particular one, we ended up doing some local projects, strategic planning, business planning. And then I always say you have to create a project of your own. And so I may have suggested that we do a conference east of the river, which is the majority Black for now community that has no university, has no bank, has nothing. And so they did. And so they had to put it all together. And so we put together a 2-day conference. And we said, look, if 20 people show up, we're happy. We had 147 on the first day, 167 on the second day. I only remember that because we ran out of food. We raised $5,000 from Comcast to put this on, did a pitch competition where residents got to decide which businesses could come into their communities. And at the end, people said, well, this is awesome. Now what? And I was like, I'm going back to teaching. These kids are going back to school. And really then had to figure out, what do I do? Because I had basically made a commitment to the community, unbeknownst to me, it would be a long-term one. And that's how 1863 evolved. And so we started just in DC with this idea of moving people from founder to CEO, recognizing that longevity that it takes. So many of us don't have the capital to grow businesses and we get written off. But also because of that, we don't have a lot of successful people like both of you and other folks like Rich Dennis and, other more historical folks. And we don't have a lot of information on what it takes to grow a business. We don't have the social capital that my grandfather can call and find me a CFO who's going to come in for free for 6 months or help me out. And so I found that there was a lack of tactical information on how to grow a business. And it is not through fundraising. It is how do you actually grow a business? And so that's our niche. And 88% of all the programs in the country focus on startups. We are one of the 12%. And when I did my research, there was no one doing it for what we call the new majority entrepreneurs. And I'm like, well, this is stupid. We're the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs and nobody's trying to help us. Let me fill this niche. And over time, we have now evolved to running our own programs, so actually running programs for other organizations and then paying us, to also now having 3 funds. So we have our own flagship fund, that's money I raise that we invest in our alumni. We are the administrator of the fund on behalf of DC. So if any DC entrepreneurs who are raising money, we're running that fund. And then we're about to co-start a fund with a large entity to invest in the spirits business, to invest in Black-owned spirit and distillers.
Yes.
I'm excited about, because as you know, Monique, I'm a huge tequila drinker. And so we've pivoted to say we have a goal to create $100 billion of new wealth.
Oh, I got a mint mojito mixture, hunty.
So we have a goal to create $100 billion by 2030. And so we are now really thinking about how to scale that organization, how to scale 1863, how to have more funds, how to get our information out to entrepreneurs. We just launched a podcast where we talk to entrepreneurs and like pull back the covers and say, don't tell me the fancy stuff. Don't give me your pitch on Shark Tank.
Oh, well, promote your podcast. What's the podcast?
So it's called Founder Hustle.
Yes.
The full name is Sermons Beyond Sunday, Founder Hustle. And hopefully I don't offend anybody. I'm a spiritual person, not a religious person. And I realized that particularly in the Black community, we all tend to go to the church like on Easter or Christmas, and we expect this big message. But as entrepreneurs, we get that particularly if you like listen to you and Monique, you get these little drops of nuggets on a daily basis. So it's not about getting the mountain and the sermon and waiting for change to happen, but how do you find change every single day? So it just launched yesterday, and
Congrats.
somebody interviewing me on why, and then there'll be several entrepreneurs and bankers that we talk to, because we're mindful our audience is more earlier stage businesses, and just practical advice like, when was it hard? How many times you had to fire somebody? What was it like going home and your parents like, do you have a job yet? And then talking about like, how hard is the scale? How many people you go through before you get the right COO? How do you think about operations? When do you insource? When do you outsource? We had an amazing woman, Mbulu, who's our banker, talk about, we all have, financial emergency workers. Like, we need to find somebody in the banking space who's willing to walk us through. She literally helps fill out people's EIDL when it happens. So, we're not here to make money, but I think, Monique and I have had this conversation. I am sick and tired of people watching Shark Tank thinking they did nothing to get there. And I'm sick and tired of consultants taking advantage of our entrepreneurs and telling them they can help them, and they can't, because we don't know. There's no class, there's nothing that says this is what it means to grow a business. And it's not just throwing a PowerPoint together, as you both know, based on the companies you've invested in, and assume all is going to go well. The PowerPoint and the check are the beginning, not the end. And I find that most investors are not like you both, where you roll up your sleeves, you fly out to talk to the entrepreneurs. There's nobody doing that. I mean, we have an operations partner.
I've been here in LA for a week, right. When I get off of this, I'm going back into the in-person meeting with the teams,
Right.
And that's the thing, though. This is what I loved about you from the first day I met you, is that we saw the fact that if we treated venture the way that we were treated as potential investors, if we treat these founders that we're investing in the way we're treated, then they're never going to get to their Series A. They're never going to get beyond that. And if we keep making founders that look like us feel bad for the lack of resources, for the lack of education, and all of these things, and it doesn't even matter just our founders that look like us, just founders at this stage, right? Because this is an issue no matter where you come from. If you are treated like you're supposed to have it all figured out, and the billion-dollar companies don't have it figured out, they just hide it well, and they're supported in that way, then how do we ever get to these? How do we ever get these companies past that? And so Erica and I take this approach that, you have to work hard, but you know what? If you're working hard and you can prove all these things, we're going to work hard with you. And I wish more investors treated founders like that instead of having 100 portfolio companies, because I don't think people understand the damage that does. And I know from your background and your political background, you really do understand. It is not healthy to deploy millions of dollars and not hold people accountable.
Right.
It's more healthy to deploy millions of dollars to a controlled environment and make sure that everyone in that environment is doing well versus hoping one does well. Because when those other companies don't win, now whole ecosystems are impacted. Families get up and relocate for startups, and now all of a sudden they don't have jobs anymore. And so these conversations are so important. And we're going to, for founders that we can't invest in or aren't, ready for our fund thesis, we'll definitely make sure we send them over to you and to what you all are doing, especially, for the new fund, especially because being in Miami, we get a lot of the beverage companies, et cetera. So that will be, a nice pipeline for you. But one thing Erica didn't mention is that you're also one of our board partners.
Oh, I did an introduction.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. And so all of this amazing stuff about you, yet you not only find time to give your service to your family, to your community, and to all the companies you're building, but you've made time to make sure that Erica and I, as Black women who've embarked on this, traditional VC route, as far as having traditional institutional LPs, that we're protected, informed, and have a safe space to have real conversations with. And so you always show up for us. So I just want to thank you. And for, the people who are listening and who will watch this, part of our journey is not just about getting what we want out of life, but it's on that journey, we still have to show up for others. And I do think that that's not also mentioned enough. is that, yes, we give, but we also have to receive, and that cycle has to keep going, or it all keeps staying imbalanced.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%, Melissa, we so appreciate your support of our fund and, your work with us as a board partner. And I know we're bumping up on time, so I want to make sure for folks who might consider raising venture capital or applying to one of your programs or for fundings from one of your funds, what are the criteria that you guys look for in an investment? So outside of sector focus, you have funds that come in pretty early. What are some of the things that you think are important in a new investment?
So I would say there's three we look at. One is it's a sector that we know something about, because again, for me, the check is the beginning, not the end. And so I want to make sure that we're giving not just money, but expertise and advice. So that's something we understand. And over time, we've come to understand a lot of sectors. I think two, that I trust them. People are coachable, but I would say that I trust them and I understand them, because you're going to screw up. You're going to make a mistake. And so I need to know that when you see the mistake coming, you feel comfortable, and I've created a safe space for you to call me, and that we will brainstorm together how to fix that, because something's going to go wrong. That you're not stuck on a bunch of pride, like I got this, because there is no pride in this space, because there's so many factors you can't control. And then the third thing is intentionality, and what is their goal? Maybe I'll make some money on this, right? But we didn't come into this expecting I was going to make money on running these funds. But I did come into this expecting we're going to create wealth for this larger community. And so I want to understand if people are like, hit it, get out, if they're really trying to focus on some kind of impact. We're not an impact fund explicitly, but we do care about how many jobs you're going to create. I don't give a hoot about how much money you're going to raise. I do care how much revenue you're going to generate. I do expect to be profitable. And so I think just making sure that they are culturally and values aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I think those are the things that are extremely important. We funded companies that have zero revenue. We funded companies that have multi-million dollars in revenue. We're open to that. We're honored to share a company in common with you. We want to be, because of how we raised it, we want to be not just an early stage, but the more flexible, non-dilutive capital where possible, so that Black founders and female founders can continue to grow and not get stuck in this rut of, is my fate determined by some guy behind a desk who ain't never run a business to tell me if I'm a good investment or not.
That's amazing. Well, I want to remind everybody that, you have access to an absolute superstar here. So if you have a question for Melissa, put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A. This is your last chance. So before we wrap up and see if there are any additional questions, Melissa, is there one amazing piece of advice that you'd like to leave the founders and potential founders in our audience with?
Be patient with yourself. This is a marathon, not a sprint, no matter what you see on television. I think if you're particularly an entrepreneur of color or a woman, be patient. The value of your business is not determined by somebody else's valuation of your company. And so just be patient with yourself. You'll get there. You'll get there.
Yeah, I think that is such great advice, especially in the age of social media where everything's filtered and like this recap of 60 seconds. As if that is like the real measure of is a company doing well. And so it is a real process. In fact, you probably won't even have time to be on social media or caring about what other people are posting about. And I do think that for not a big concern, but I do think that that is a very common thing with founders, is that, they're comparing themselves. And so I think that advice is really amazing. And when you do focus on what you're building, and really just stay focused and only entertain the things that are building you, it's amazing the productivity that comes out of that. And I do wish for founders who are listening and watching this to understand that this is your journey, this is your company that you're building. It's not to be compared to others unless you are doing a group environment where you are all supporting each other. That's a very different conversation. And yes, the collaborative effort is important, but the competitive spirit is not what should be driving you is your business model being proven? Are you having good social impact? Is it a conscious capital that you're building, and make, and, one of the things that Eric and I get hit with a lot, and Melissa, I'm sure you do too, is that founders want these like ridiculous valuations. And it's like, do you understand? Let's talk this would be, since we have a few moments and no one has asked a question, I don't think, can you, in your terms, help founders understand what this valuation means and what the liability to the valuation actually is as well?
Yeah, I mean, first we have to understand a subjective measure, and there's lots of ways to calculate it, but I probably have a different one than you, and one's not right, one is wrong. It's just how we value the level of inputs. I think one, we have to remember it's not a proxy for what we're doing. It is a number and a target upon which to have a larger fundraising strategy. And so people should not be all up in their feelings about their valuation. I think two, you're right. Look at the astronomical valuations. And I should say, be mindful that this may be too much for people, but I am so pissed at all these platform companies who are in series G, H, I, and J, because they're taking pension fund money, and those pension fund money belongs to people who look like me. And so I think understand that a bigger valuation does not guarantee success, as we've seen with Airbnb and Uber. It does not mean you're going to get any wealthier, because the more you have to raise, the less you actually own. And so I think be mindful of where you're trying to get to, reverse engineer that pathway around financing, parse out how many rounds you need so it's reasonable. Know that if you come out the box too high and you do not hit your revenue goals or any of your other OKRs, you're going to have a down round, and you don't recover from a down round. What was that thing? The Fitbit down round didn't happen, never recovered, never came back. And so I think it's important that you understand that valuation, again, is not an indicator of success. It has nothing to do with how much you're personally going to be worth. It is a proxy by which we as investors begin to divvy up the company and really think about what's our investment thesis and strategy and what's our rate of return. But if you don't do your job, it is absolutely meaningless. And so I always say to folks, your first round of funding should be a convertible note, so you actually even understand what you can and cannot do, how much money you need to actually drive growth. And then you understand what are the dollars needed to get to that ultimate valuation, because you have to envision an exit to be able to do so. But just don't get caught up, because it's fake, but it's like monopoly money. You ain't never going to see it until you get to the end result.
Right.
And if you not price it appropriately, if you don't price these rounds appropriately, nobody's going to pay to join you on that journey, and you will just fall off the cliff.
Then it just goes downhill. Exactly.
Right.
So we have a question from Calvin Harris, who I feel like is always here joining us live.
He's such a great supporter of ours.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, Calvin. And he wants to know what you think about the near-term macro environment and what sectors might be in demand outside of technology from a VC investor perspective.
Yeah. So, let me be honest, there's not a lot of VCs that are not looking at tech, but it doesn't mean there aren't investors. We are sector agnostic. We recognize that less than 20% of all Black companies at this point in time are tech businesses. It's growing, but the majority of businesses are in CPG, food and beverage, business services, et cetera. Most Black businesses, 70% of all Black businesses are in 7 sectors, and only one of them is tech. So I think there are more and more types of folks. We at HC3 look at that. Founders First with Kim Folsom looks at that. Lighter Capital. There's more and more folks who don't care if you're a tech company or not, but they do expect, we expect, the same trajectory of growth and revenue potential, because we do need to pay our LPs back. So I think there's lots of opportunity for those folks. I think the trends that we're seeing are more non-dilutive financing options, like royalty financing coming out of Jules in Atlanta. We do revenue-based. Kim does revenue-based. So I think people are recognizing there's a platform beyond just venture for tech companies. I think the other trend is there's a lot more Black GPs out there, right? Over $300 billion. I feel like there's a new fund every single day. So ideally, hopefully that translates into more options for capital, because there are more people who look like us in general partnership seats. I would say, post George Floyd, where I'm still waiting like everybody else for all these commitments to come to fruition beyond just a bunch of grant programs. So I'm optimistic that there's more people who are going to do some really good stuff. And then I would say, probably the biggest thing for a business, that consumers are finally paying attention, right? I mean, we have seen dramatic growth of our companies, and we had a 95% survival rate post-COVID, because folks are actually realizing, wait, there's a Black business that can actually do that. And so I would say, regardless of building a business, you should be building it for the customer, not the investor. I do believe that changed during this height of everybody running before the bubble burst to get venture capital. you're not building a business for an investor. You're building a business for your
Not
customer.
sustainable, right?
Absolutely not. And we saw, I mean, I was in California when the bubble burst. I'm like, what the hell happened? So I think there are some things that have stayed the same, and there are some things that have certainly changed.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. You know, you need to think about what are you passionate about? What's your sort of unique set of skills that you're bringing to the table, and build a business around that. So
And what real problem are you solving, right? Like it still boils down to, this has to be a problem that not only you care about, but that a lot of people feel like it's a problem.
It can't be just a problem that you have. And I will say, I mean, I you know, there's lots of examples, but I hope I'm saying his name right, but Tope Awana, like that brother is focused. You said he doesn't do social media. He doesn't take meetings. He showed up for one event that he got invited to with a bunch of Black VCs. He is laser focused. He doesn't do email if it's not from his team. He's, you know, and he is mindful, what does my customer need? And so his product improvements were not to keep up with other folks who are trying to do that, but he's constantly listening to his customers. I mean, that was $1 billion business. And so I think that's, you got to make sure you're following the right
sorry,
people.
who
Right?
are you talking about? The founder of which company?
Of Calendly.
Calendly.
Calendly. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, so
I don't think a lot of people even know that that is a Black founder. The owner, the guy who created Calendly is a Black man. And it's $1 billion business. And you're right. You don't see him out. You don't see him at parties. You don't see him at events. He's literally building a sustainable business model quietly.
That's right. He's got a head down and he's laser focused. And I think that's important. You know, when you said what, you know, that's the biggest takeaway to me. And I think just to the question around what's evolved over time, to your point, entrepreneurship is not a vanity sport. It is not, you being seen is not going to drive business, but you being focused on building a business is what's going to drive the revenue. I think that's a big thing that a lot of entrepreneurs are forgetting, because every day there's a new friggin' business show on TV that makes it seem like you can get rich in 5 minutes.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Melissa.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, you're the best. This was so informative, and you know, just judging from the comments, I think everyone who attended is really grateful for your advice and wisdom. And we want to thank everyone who showed up live for engaging in our community. I hope you'll all join us again next month, where we're going to be meeting another amazing Rain Ventures CEO. This time, we're actually bringing in one of our LPs instead of one of our portfolio company founders, Monique Rodriguez, who is the founder of Mael Organics and a Rain Ventures LP. And if you're a founder looking to raise capital, please contact us and submit your pitch at rainvc.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Melissa.